Oh, are we starting already? Oh, crap. I'm so sorry. I was just watching Lord of the Rings. I can't stop watching this movie. Let me just pause this. Despite all the great presentations, I'm just such a nerd. I'm so sorry. Let's get started, right? This movie, this photo guy. I mean, he's amazing. You know, he just gets this ring from somebody and he needs to cast it into Mount Doom on the other side of the continent. And he doesn't know how. It's a huge journey ahead of him, right? He needs to do so many things. He needs to get out of the Shire. He needs to get rid of those Black Rider guys and escape them. He needs to fix that stabbing wound that he got. He needs to solve Moria and survive. And we're not even at the end of the first movie here. This guy has a lot of stuff to solve, which, now that we're in this workshop anyway, not unlike building a simulation model, especially if you're a beginner or a medium user. You know, you have your big fat client or boss who's screaming at you, build me that glorious digital twin, and you're still in the Shire, kind of like, I have no idea how to get there. So you need to solve lots of problems along the way. So why not use that time now for us to learn how to solve some problems in AnyLogic, right? So let's have a look. What are we going to do? Well, first, a word to those of you who have no idea about Lord of the Rings. You'll still learn a lot in this presentation. Excuse the geekiness, but it's just such a meme machine. There's so many like linkages that you can do with Lord of the Rings. And I mean, after all, it's on you. You disturbed me watching. So let's have some fun. What we're going to do is, first of all, we'll solve some beginner problems and learn the process of solving typical Hobbit questions. You're very new to the continent. We'll look at some more advanced problems when you consider yourself an elf or dwarf. So that's somebody in my world who's used AnyLogic for 6 months to 2 years full time. I would consider you a medium user. But we'll also see if we can help some of the wizards out there who've used the tool for more than 2 years full time, have looked at lots of different nooks and crannies already, and are starting to do something nobody else has ever done before. And then, as announced, you're going to see me falter. My good friend and AnyLogic expert, Max Sellmeier, has provided me with a model that has a problem that I've never seen before, and we'll see what we get out of that. But first, let's look at some typical issues. And let's get the main meme out of the way. That's probably the one everybody has seen. You don't just simply walk into Mordor. Let's get it out of the way. We're done with it. Imagine yourself, you have a client, you work for a company, you have a boss, or you're maybe a PhD supervisor. Somebody basically yells at you, I want this digital twin. I want it now. It's going to be amazing. It has to do everything. So the situation is essentially that you or your boss, you know this system quite well, the real system. You're an expert, your boss is an expert, and they want this as a digital version. It's a little bit like, you know, Gandalf just throwing this ring into the hands of Frodo and saying, I think you should throw it into Mordor on the other side of the continent. I'm not quite sure how you're going to get there. Yeah, I'm sure you'll figure it out. Bye-bye. So that's not an easy situation. Now, the thing is, you do not just walk into Mordor. It's really true. What many beginners and sometimes medium users are really doing is the following. Let me share my screen. So I hope you can see AnyLogic. Well, so you know the system, you start a new model, you're very happy, you're very motivated. You might have heard a little bit about the blocks in AnyLogic. You might have seen some models. So you just start playing around. You start dragging in those blocks. You want to build maybe a factory. So you heard about the source block. Things are arriving at the factory. You put them into a storage. So you think a queue might be good. Then you have a machine. That's a delay. Maybe after the machine, there's a decision to be made. And you just keep on painting your system in AnyLogic. And that's bad. This is a problem, because with a model like that, you will run into problems. What I often see online when people ask for help is that people build models like that. Really long flow charts, lots of stuff going on. Typically, They drag in a couple of blocks, set a couple of properties, click play, and at the end, they are wondering, why is my model not recreating reality? And the reason is that you should not build models like that. So if I see a spaghetti model like that, I already know you're in trouble. It will be very hard to find the actual issue, the root cause of your problem. It will be very hard to validate and verify this model. You run into all sorts of trouble. So what's happening if you just decide to walk into mortar is you will be eaten alive by the bulwark in Moria. So you want to avoid that. You don't want to be eaten. In the movie, last minute save by Wizard Gandalf, he saves you, all is good. In reality, it might not happen that there's going to be a good wizard that saves you. So you have to work slightly differently. And there are different ways that we're going to talk about in this talk about fixing that situation. Let's look at one of them. One of the solutions is that you start scouting out your path ahead a little bit. Yes, you open Google Maps for Middle-earth, you are in the Shire, you need to get to Mordor. How do you get there? And one way to figure out how to get there comes with AnyLogic for free. Share my screen again. So in AnyLogic, before you even start building a complex model like that, you have so-called example models, help example models. Just click on that if you've never seen it before. There are almost 500 example models. And what I suggest you do is that you go check them all out, to be honest. In a recent training course I gave to the people as a homework, I said, why don't you just open one model per day? So in 1.5 years, you'll have seen every model. It's such a good exercise. So let's do that. Let's just open a model. Let's say oil supply chain is interesting to you. And the first thing you do when you open a model like that and try to figure out what's going on and get inspired is just click play. Have a go at the model, see how it behaves, what you can do. Read the description, obviously, but then off you go. See what's going on in the model. Look at the animation. Click everywhere that you can click. What statistics do you have? Can you interact with the model? How does it behave? Can you click at other things? Maybe you can look into individual agents and get a feeling for that model and start scouting what's interesting for you. Now, after that, the next step is to go back into the model and understand the model itself a little bit. And there are a couple of simple rules that you can follow to easily understand a new model. The first one is typically go into this main object. That's normally where things are starting, and try to figure out, how do things actually start in this model? Where is action really happening? The first place to look is in the properties of main, agent actions on startup. Look if there's some sort of code being executed. This will run at the start of the model. So check out this code and see what's going on. For example, this setup tankers is called, and it loops through a population of tankers, which takes you to the next step in the heuristic. Check out the model hierarchy itself. Look for these red little icons of embedded agents, populations or single agent. So you get a feeling for who lives where, what is the hierarchy of the model, who's embedded into what other agent. And then go into those other agents and do the same thing again. How does activity start in a tanker itself? Now, this tanker has no startup code, so there's nothing happening code-wise. So you look for other things that happen at the start of the model. You look for a state chart and how this agent would exit the first state of the state chart. Who sent this message? Where is it coming from? You look for source blocks, fluid source blocks, process library source blocks, pet source blocks, any kind of source block that is actually trying to push something into a process flow. In this case, this just has nothing at the start, but later on, it might create some fluid and put it into the tank. How does fluid get into the source block? And the last one to look out for is events. If you have an event somewhere, when does it trigger and what does it do? So with these simple heuristics, you get a start. You have interesting example models, you get a feeling for what's out there, what you can do, and you found a model that does something that you're quite interested in. How did they model a supply chain? How did they model creating orders, whatever? So try to distill that a little bit and maybe copy it into your model, maybe recreate it from scratch in a simpler version, but it's a really, really good starting point. So don't just walk into Mordor, take a map, look at some example models. Let's look at another very typical situation. You've all been there, even if you're a beginner. You look at your model, you click play, and it's like, huh, that's weird. Something is unexpected. A little bit like Gandalf looking at Bilbo putting on his ring. Oh, why do I trust it? I've got the ring, but it doesn't make me invisible. And thinking, huh, that's weird. Why does he disappear? What's going on there? Now, in reality, sorry, not in reality, in the movie, my reality, what did Gandalf do? We'll get to that in a second. So let's get into the situation. Let's go into the real world again and wonder about a typical situation of something not working. So a very typical situation is people misunderstanding things, how things are supposed to work. For example, the source block using await. We'll see what I mean by that, but it's a very classic question. Many people are asking that in the forums. They have a source block, they set it to await to create agents once per second, and they wonder it's not once per second. Many people are asking. So surely that's a bug, right? Surely that's not your fault, you think, as a beginner, and surely it will be your fault. AnyLogic is incredibly bug-free in my experience, and the more of a beginner you are, the higher the chances it's on you. So how do you fix something like that? Now let's look at what Gandalf did in the fake Lord of the Ring world. He had the luxury to go on a research trip. He actually spent a couple of years looking at documents and libraries and stuff. And we don't have the luxury of spending years on reading up of things, but obviously you should read the help or Google the issue. But the other big thing that you need to get into the habit of doing is to distill the problem that you're interested in and build a small example model just of that one little problem. So build tiny little example models. Let me show you what I mean. So we're in AnyLogic 9. It's really good for tiny little example models. And I'm interested in this weight thing. I'm not interested in my whole big fat model back there. I just wonder, why is the source block not working? So I just create a source block that simply tries to create agents once per second. And then I just destroy them. That's all I'm interested in. And I will investigate now what's going on. So I start the model and look at the rate. Why is it actually once per second now? Or is it not once per second? What's going on? So if I look at the time ticking along, second after second, I do see it's clearly not once per second. Sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's fewer, something weird is going on. Now, I don't want to solve this with you. The whole purpose of this is the process. Build that example model. If you have built that tiny little example model, you made a huge step towards solving your problems. And then if you would have read the help, you might have stumbled across the actual solution. This is in the background actually exponentially distributed into arrival time. So there is randomness, which explains the phenomena. But that's irrelevant here. Build those example models. So build the tiny example models. Try to focus on the core issue at hand. What's really the problem? Ignore your model. Peel out what you need. Read the help, obviously. And then bonus tip that is relevant for everybody, not just beginners, is to create your own little knowledge base. Let me share with you my little knowledge base that I've been building on for the past 15 years or so. Now I have this thing in front of everything. Let's move things around. There we are. So I use Dropbox paper. It doesn't matter what you use, but have some sort of system. Whenever I learn something, whenever AnyLogic helps me, or I learn something, or I figure something out, I try to document it in a kind of structured manner. It doesn't really matter, whatever suits you well. But I'm using a method of how-to questions. Lots and lots of how-to questions. I state the problem, And I put in the solution, sometimes with a bit of code, sometimes with screenshots, sometimes with the entire model itself, which allows me to just search for stuff. And I use this every week. There's always little things that I can't remember and look up and know I've done it before, so it should be possible. So do go into the knowledge base, create your own knowledge base. Now you might wonder why mine isn't public. It's not shareable. There's so much dirty stuff in there that's outdated as well. So it's really good for just getting yourself up to speed, or maybe your company. Let's look into another little insight. Let's think about the counsel. So when Gandalf then, after his research trip, learned that this ring seems to be fairly important and fairly dangerous, well, Frodo was already on his way to Mordor, and Gandalf was with him. And guess what he did? He did not actually spend all the time with Frodo and trying to protect him. Instead, he said, hey, Frodo, something important has come up. I got to leave you. I'm sure you'll be fine. See you in a little bit, but I need to seek some counsel. So he went to some other wise wizards and basically wanted to ask them, what the hell do we do now? And you should be doing the same, obviously. So if you're ever stuck, the help doesn't help you, example models doesn't help you, do seek the counsel. And unlike in Lord of the Rings, the wise wizards of AnyLogic are not secretly evil. That's a bonus for you. So let's look at a classical situation here. Another classic problem that people are having is that a select output in their flowchart is not behaving the way that they expect it to behave. And this question is asked even more often, causes even more confusion. So let's look at it in some detail. So you do what we've learned already. You build a tiny little example model. I have prepared one for us. No, that's not the one. Should be the one. So I can't see my top line here. This is the one. There we go. Okay. So tiny simple example model to test the select output. What I'm doing is got a little source block, and when I click this button, I just inject one little agent. The one little agent spends 1 second in a delay block. This mimics the rest of the model, all the functionality that I don't care about. And exiting the delay block, I set a little Boolean variable to false. This vUseExit1, which is true by default. But as soon as an agent exits, it sets it to false because the agent basically says, I want to use this lower exit. In the select output properties, I'm saying if vUseExit is equal to true, use the upper exit. But if it's false, use the lower one. And the problem that people are having and that we recreate with this simple example model now is that it does not work the way you think it should work. So let's have a look. So the Boolean variable is true at the start, as it should be. I inject my agent. It spends 1 second in here. It sets the variable to false on exit, as it should, but it does not exit via the false exit. It exits via the true exit. And that confuses a lot of people. I do it again, and this time it actually uses the false exit, the lower one. And subsequently, it keeps on using that. So again, this is not about solving this kind of problem. It's a very classical problem. This is about how do you seek counsel with something like that? Because this specific problem actually spans several flowchart blocks. So it's a bit more involved, and you won't get a simple response in the help. So this is the case most often, right? You just stumped and you can't figure it out. So you seek counsel. There are 3 ways to seek counsel. There's the AnyLogic support. That is a paid subscription. If you have the professional version, I think you get it for free for a year. But you pay for it, and you get really, really good quality results and replies from the actual AnyLogic development team. So they know the tool inside out. And it's great because you can ask them any kind of question, little technical questions like this one, but also, big fat, how do I best structure a model for X? Can you help me design a simple example model for Y? Do you maybe have something? It's really good. I still use them to the day. I still have questions that they can answer that I cannot answer. So it's definitely worth the money, in my opinion. But beyond that, there is more. There's also the LinkedIn form. If you're not on there, sign up and join the group, the AnyLogic group. It's over 8,000 people this day. So there's a lot of people seeing your question. And it's really good for asking open-ended questions, what's better, system dynamics or agent-based, or how should I best model a factory? It's kind of open-ended, broad questions. It's not really good for technical questions. Specific, I have this issue, I can't get any further. For that, Stack Overflow is a much better place, which is a really, really big web page, millions of people on it, for technical questions and answers. And AnyLogic has one tag on it. So if you ask a question and tag it with AnyLogic, many of the AnyLogic wizards in the wide world will see it and will be able to help you, but you need to be quite specific. Which takes us now really to the one skill to rule them all. I would dangle this in front of you, but it's not very sharp. This is relevant for everybody. This is relevant for hobbits and elves and wizards alike. What is the one skill to rule them all, the big one? In my opinion, it's how to ask questions. That is the one skill that you need to focus on. Learning AnyLogic, secondary, modeling well, secondary, asking good questions will speed up your learning curve. I would estimate by a factor of 2 to 5 if you ask them well. And also speed up your model development process. If you're on the Shire and you need to go to Mordor, you'll get there 1.5 to 2 times faster, I would think, by asking questions well. I see 3 keys that you need to ask good questions. So let's go through them. It's really, really important. The first one is to simplify. I've already touched upon it. I want you to ask simple questions. Don't add fluff. I'm a beginner. I just started out. I live in New Zealand, or I want to build this orc factory for Saruman or whatever. Focus on what's important. Only provide the information that is relevant for the problem that you have. And the problem that you have needs to be small. You can't sit in the Shire and say, I'm a hobbit, just got this ring I kind of needed to throw into Mordor. How do I do that? Nobody, except the paid AnyLogic support, will sit down and write this out for you. Nobody's going to rewrite The Lord of the Rings for you one more time. J.R. Tolkien did, but that's it. And nobody's done that before. Nobody's thrown that ring into Mordor before. So it's very unlikely you're going to get help with these broad questions. What you can ask is, I'm a little hobbit, just got this ring, I'm in the Shire. My next step is to get out of the Shire. I already did a bit of research. I know I can leave the Shire by this forest. It's kind of dangerous. Or I can take the river, but I get wet. Is that the only way out, or is there another one? Now with that, I can answer. No, there's no other one. You should use the river because you only get wet, but you'll die in the forest. Simple. And then you've solved one problem, and then you go to the next one and the next one. This is the magic. So simplify your problem. Then prepare the question well. So don't share your full model. Don't say you're going to go to Mordor. It doesn't matter. Only explain the tiny setup. Prepare an example model, just the little problem that you're interested in. Because that makes our lives easy. It makes your life harder, but it shows you've put some effort into the question. It shows you already thought about it. And we just need to answer it. So your goal needs to be to ease our burden and not your burden. And the last one is to prime us to actually answer to you. And what I mean by that is to reduce that cognitive load. So try to ask your question in a way that I can answer with one word. Should I use the forest or should I use the river? Very good question. If I can answer it with one word, that's a really good question. If I can answer it with one sentence, that's still a good question, and you will get replies quite fast. Anything beyond that, your chance of getting a reply diminishes exponentially, and the time to get replies gets longer and longer and longer if you get a reply at all. But I know this is all very theoretical. So let's have a look at a good example. Just a couple of days ago, somebody on Stack Overflow blew me away with a really good question. It wasn't me, I promise. It was a real user. Now this guy or lady did something really good. The question is how to ensure the downtime is functioning, blah, blah, blah. So it's a fairly short question and to the point, that's good. But the real thing, what blew me away is he or she literally gets into the question. I have the following downtime block, tiny little sentence, bam. And then it's followed up with a screenshot and just another very short sentence that I've included in the resource pool. And this is important. The adding screenshots to your question really, really helps. We get more out of it as AnyLogic wizards than getting code or you just describing it. Screenshots are the best. Code is also really, really useful. Then this person said what he or she tried. So a bit of code there. This is what I tried. I can see in the screenshot some trace lines. They already did the testing and they're saying what I tried and then what I expected. So it's clearly saying it should be reduced to 0, but it's not. And then it's the gold standard. This person then actually said, hey, I actually found a fix. I got it working. But is this really the best way or am I missing something? So the person is priming us for a yes or no answer in the end, which is fantastic. Even without that, it would be a really good question. Just very short, to the point, with pictures, no fluff, and showing that you did the effort already and that you put in some thought work. And notice this is not even an example model, right? This is the actual model, and still it's a really good question. So that is one skill. That will advance your learning and your modeling and make it much, much faster, especially splitting your problems into tiny little problems. If you ask tiny little problems and you get answers fast, you will make this journey a lot faster than if you ask one big, fat, expansive question that nobody will answer, or you will get a very bad answer that takes a long time. Alrighty, let's jump out of the Hobbit world a little bit and take it a bit more experienced users in and look at some more experienced, more advanced techniques of solving problems. Let me introduce you to Gimli. Now, Gimli is a dwarf, Lord of the Rings, and he's a bit of a hotshot. So he's got an axe, and he wants to solve all problems with this axe. There's an orc, gonna kill him. And many beginners and medium users are a little bit like Gimli. They see a problem in AnyLogic, and they just want to solve it as fast as possible. Let me give you an example. Let's look at another model. Let's close this one. So it's a very simple model where I have a value that is in seconds. So it's 300 seconds. And maybe some KPI or some end user would like to see that value just in minutes as a KPI. Now, what Gimli is doing by converting those 300 into minutes is he's literally just dividing by 60. Because if I have 300 seconds divided by 60, I get 5 minutes. That's the ratio. Now that is not the best way. That is the Gimli way that you shouldn't be doing. Instead, you should be a little bit more wise and act like wise Gandalf. So Gandalf instead would not just divide by 60, but he'd use some built-in functions. Now the thing here is, with functions like that, I never remember what those functions are doing, how exactly they are. I do know there's the second function. I do know there is this minute function. There's another one for each time unit in the model. But I always read this because it helps me remember how exactly does it work. It returns a time value equal to 1 minute according to the current model time unit setting. So it helps me a lot. And you need to get into this habit as well. So what you need to start doing massively is to use the advantage of Java code complete and understand in detail what these yellow boxes and this code complete is actually giving you. Because there's a lot of stuff in there. There's obviously the what. What is this function doing? It might also list the input parameters. You know, if this function wants something from you, gets you a description of what you need to give it, that's all good. But there's more. It also tells you exactly what it returns, especially the data type. So this function returns a double. Tells me a lot of information, what kind of stuff I get back from that function. It tells me where it lives. So that's over here. It says utilities. So this function is part of a utilities package, which itself was created by AnyLogic. So I know, this is an AnyLogic function. There are other sources that are pure Java code. So I know, oh, this was done by Java itself. This was coded by AnyLogic. That's valuable. And then when you write your own code, you see, oh, this is for me. This is from my agent type or my Java class. Reminds you, oh, this is my code, actually. Better be careful. And then if you get more and more advanced, you will exploit object-oriented programming more and more. So the visibility of your function, this is a public function, is also helpful information. Now, I don't want to explain what all this is. I want you to get into it and exploit it and use it. And as a bonus, if you haven't seen that before, you can document your own functions with Javadoc. So if you have a little function under the description tab, you can write what it does and use those Javadoc handles, as they're called, to list and describe the parameters, to list what it returns at return, to list who did it, when it was done with at since. Maybe it throws some errors in some condition. So you can use all those. And I strongly recommend for functions, use all of those for sure. For other blocks that are important, you should also use it, not like this, but to actually sign your work at least. Really, really helpful. And the advantage here is then that if you ever call your function, you will get that little window, that little yellow window. Just compile again so we actually see it. There we go. So nicely formatted. And this is now my function. Sits on main, returns a double, and is public. So I was Gimli for you in a nutshell. Don't be like Gimli, be like Weißgandalf. Let me introduce you to another character, Aragorn. You need to be like Aragorn, and Aragorn is really like Sherlock Holmes. You need to be like Sherlock Holmes. I didn't want to break universes, so we'll stay with Aragorn. He's looking very inquisitively here, trying to solve a problem where two of the hobbits have been stolen by orcs, and he needs to find them. And what he does in the movie is basically escalating more and more serious investigation, and where the hell are those hobbits going? And you need to do the same thing. And there is a simple process that you can follow. Let's look at another model, a very typical situation as well, and try to fix that problem. In this model, what I have is just a simple agent population of hobbit agents, initially empty. I'm going to create a Frodo agent. So I'm going to ask the population, please create a new hobbit with the name Frodo. And then if I click this button, I want Frodo to save Middle-earth. So I go into the population and I want to find the first agent in it whose name is Frodo, store it briefly, and then tell Frodo, hey, go to Mordor, do your thing. And this obviously, this works nice. So we got our Frodo now, and I can tell him, go to Middle-earth. Fantastic. Except what easily happens is that you as a modeler write some code that actually forgets to even create Frodo. You're just telling Frodo, hey, go save Middle-earth. And now all hell breaks loose. You get a big fat error message. How do you solve a problem like that? Now, the first call of action would be to click on this blue link here for more details. See console, it opens the console. This is not too helpful for medium and beginner users. Later on, fairly helpful, as we'll see. So let's ignore that for now. What else can we do? My first point of call would be to say, well, if this was broken at a specific point in time, like let's say this actually broke the model at 44.45, typically the model actually breaks. Let me just rerun it, and let's run it until just before that, 44 time units. And you can do that. Use those controls, learn about those controls. What you're actually doing is you're nudging yourself closer and closer to the issue. Where is the real issue in this model? Once you have a hypothesis of where it sits, you do the next trick. If your hypothesis is, well, I think it's in this button, actually, something is weird going on, you can ignore the button. You can ignore any item in your model, any variable function. It might trigger some issues if you build your model not very elegantly, but it's a good, quick way to take something out and see, does my model work now? If I only create photo, yeah, all is good. And this is what I mean by Sherlocking. You have a hypothesis and you're kind of narrowing down where things are. Now let's go further. We already know this seems to be in this button. The next step then would be to use trace lines to really figure out, well, which line of code is this problem sitting in? So you can literally put these trace lines between each code line, restart the model, and see exactly where it breaks. So I'm going to break the model on purpose. And in the console now, I see the first trace line starting. So everything's fine here. Then this line of code is called, and I see the second trace line, try to find photos. So this line of code is still working, but then I don't see the last one. So pretty sure my problem is here. And obviously, in reality, your problems aren't that simple, but the process is always the same. This is how you nudge yourself closer and closer to the real point of the issue. And if you haven't seen or figured out the problem yet, you can take it one step further. If you have the professional version or the university researcher version, you can right-click in this gray space and toggle a breakpoint. So the next thing is you need to start learning how to use the debugger. We don't have the time for that here, but just to briefly show you how it works, you set this breakpoint, you trigger the error, and then in the IDE, you can actually step through the code now. So we are just before this line of code. The error hasn't been triggered yet because this line of code hasn't been triggered yet, but I can now look into the model and see exactly what's going on where. So my object photo is null. There's nothing in there. There is no photo. This is what's causing the null pointer exception. So I go back one line of code, one line up, and see, well, why is this photo null? What's triggering that? What is this function doing, trying to find the first hobbit in this population? And then you can go into the population and check out what's going on. And you'll see, well, there are no agents in the population. And again, it's a trivial problem, but the process is the important one. What I suggest is, very first step, check your models manually with a run it again, run it to the point in time, try to narrow it down. Then isolate and ignore where you think the problem is coming from. Very often, these two steps already solve your problem. It's a trivial thing, you forgot something, you need to reactivate something, whatever. If not, use trace lines and try to narrow it down further and further. And very often you have to rerun the model, add some more trace lines, rerun it again, add some more trace lines further and further back until you hit where something really weird is happening. But if that doesn't help, or if it's too slow, then at some point you bring out the big guns, which is the debugger. So in my day-to-day work, steps 1 and 2 typically solve 50% of my problems. Up to step 3, 90% of my problems. And then step 4 is 100% of my problems. I bring out the debugger not regularly, well, regularly, but not very often. I always do trace lines first. It's a lot faster typically. But put on that Sherlock hat, put on the hypothesis, and then test it. And exclude things that you have tested. Now, with these heuristics and rules, you still cannot solve all the issues. There are some very nasty little bugsies that you can come across that are not solvable by those. So let me give you 2 little bonus tips. The first one is if we go back into our model. Let me just trigger that error again. There we go, big fat error. For more details, see console. We go to the console. It's a lot of red text, which is scary and not really helpful. But if we go back into the IDE, into the console here, the same text appears, but with hyperlinks, blue hyperlinks that we can click. And the simple rule for you to figure out where is this error coming from, in this case, it's explicitly telling it to you because it's a new version of Java, but there are many errors still where it's not that useful, not that explicit. So what you can do is to just click on the very first blue link from the top, except this one, the first one at the end of the line. And if you're lucky, it will open some Java code. Don't be scared by it. Have a look at it. This is the Java code of main itself. And it highlights the line where the problem is appearing. And then figure out if this is code that you've written. You should be able to realize, yep, this is code that I've written. And then all you need to do is go into the search for it, and it will take you right to the actual point in the model. Frequently, you have to do that little exercise. Sometimes the first link does not take you to your code. Sometimes it takes you to some other code that you don't recognize. I've never written this code. And in fact, if I look a little closer, I can see this is flagged to be AnyLogic code. So I can't do anything here. This is not changeable for me. So you just keep on clicking. If you don't get this at the top of the line, you just keep on clicking more blue links further down. Sometimes you hit these error messages that just says this code is not accessible to you. So that's also not helpful. You just keep on clicking. And most of the time, you will come to a blue line that is your code, and then you get your location. So use the blue links, start from the top. There's another nasty little thing that happens if you get your syntax wrong. So share my screen again. And let's look at another little example model. Notice how I do all of this with little example models. This is how you should do your learning journey as well. Trivially simple model, just an event that triggers every second, and it's calling this f-nested code function, which itself just loops through some integer and trace lines stuff. So it's really just trace lining things. If I run this, it just trace lines a lot of stuff, all as well. Now imagine you realize, oh, well, actually I need to do a little change. Yeah, this should only be called if some condition is true. So let me add that code. You do some more coding here or deleted something. You run your model, you did these tiny little changes, and suddenly you get an error message, something is wrong, and suddenly you get lots of errors. Where do all these errors suddenly come from? It's very scary. I just did this tiny change. Whenever you get this situation, tiny little change, lots of errors popping up, you messed up the syntax. You messed up with the squiggly little brackets. So these error messages are also often very hard to understand. Illegal modifier, no idea what he's talking about. The reason for all of this is that in the background, AnyLogic writes this Java code. And if you forget some sort of squiggly bracket or you added one too many, it messes up the entire formatting of all these functions. And Java does not understand this thing at all anymore. So to solve this, you need to go back and realize what kind of code you are writing and have a look at it. So I see here, I forgot to close my squiggly bracket. Let me do that. And now I'm only down to one error. So very often with these squiggly brackets, Java actually picks it up. It's not lots of error messages. It's just one. Then you're in luck, like in this case. But still, even here, you need to figure out where this is. Oh, this is close to this for while code. I did write this code. Where was it again? And then just look at your code and find that squiggly bracket that is too much or too little. So nasty little squiggly brackets. If you get lots of error messages suddenly, remember that. And if you build models how you should build them, which is one tiny little change, test, 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 another tiny little change, you'll always know what you just did. So it's fairly easy to fix. Okay, bit more advanced stuff. Let's put the wizards into the room. So if you've done more than 2 years of AnyLogic, I consider you some sort of Gandalf. You have looked at lots of different problems. You've looked at lots of different nooks and crannies in AnyLogic. And you are about to start to build something or do something with AnyLogic that nobody's ever done before. And I just want to talk about the process of that again. How do you solve any problem in AnyLogic? Anything you want to do. This tool is infinitely flexible and there's essentially nothing you cannot do. So it's like, again, like our good old Photo who needs to throw this ring into Mount Doom, which nobody has done before. In my career, I've done lots of these kind of things. The ones that I can share is, for example, figuring out how to pull in Google Maps photogrammetry into AnyLogic models and make them look like, 3D Google Maps. Pretty cool. I coded this reinforcement learning example model from scratch. No reinforcement learning library. It's all just raw Java code, to have this kind of educational tool to easily explain how it actually works in the background. Or I had this situation where the pathfinding in AnyLogic networks is really good, but sometimes you want to go beyond that and do your own custom pathfinding and actually turn every path and every node in AnyLogic into their own little agents to get more control, to do KPIs on those road segments and all that kind of stuff. Just one close road, one-sided road, whatever, give them any characteristics. So all of these things had never been done before. But for all of these things, I followed a process. And it's always very, very similar. So you always start out with a tiny example model. You see the theme of all of this. I have a problem in a real client model. For example, I need to have custom route finding or whatever, super advanced statistics on roads. I don't try to implement that into the custom model, into the customer model. I build a separate small model from scratch. I draw a little network, and then I know I can build on top of that and try to get in the functionality that I need. Then it's sitting down. It's like Gandalf. Then you need to do your research. You need to read up on how does reinforcement learning really work in the ground, what kind of libraries are out there that could do stuff that I need to do, how does Blender work for photogrammetry, stuff like that. You just need to do it. Nobody will do it for you. So you need to read out on that. But once you've done that, you can then try to implement what you've learned into your prototype and build on that tiny example model sequentially, add a tiny little feature, test it like crazy. And now you might think, okay, well, when the prototype is working, I'm done, right? And this is where the real wizard level kicks in my opinion. A real wizard takes it one step further, which is to document the hell out of this. So if I learn something new, I build something new, for example, these models that I've just shown you, what I like to do, if my client allows it, or it's stuff that I do by myself, is to create videos online or write a blog post. So I share it with the community. I don't only do it for the community, I do it for myself as well. It does happen that I forget what I did and I just look up my own videos and figure out, well, what the hell did I do? And let's look at a real example there with this pathfinding setup. So I wanted to have custom pathfinding and have little paths in AnyLogic that are really, really powerful in their agents. So what I did first was to find a really good library. And that's literally just a Google search. So you need to start searching for some Java library that is useful. And you'll find several. I mean, stuff like that has been coded many, many times, completely independent of AnyLogic. The real challenge then is to figure out which library to use. What functionalities do they have? Will they really be able to do what I need? But that's not the main criteria. In this case, the way I chose this was based on how active is this library. When was the last release? Is there a community? Do people actually interact with it fairly recently? Are there updates? That's a much, much better decision criteria. The next thing then is to download that and implement it into AnyLogic. I'm not going to talk about how this is. If you're a wizard, you've done this, you know how to do that. But the next thing after that is, before you even start implementing it, you need to get into understanding the documentation. So you need to start learning, if you don't know it already, how does Java docs actually work? I mean, many packages come with a Hello World example and stuff like that. That's all really good. But they all come with what's called Javadoc. And Javadoc looks a little ugly. AnyLogic has this as well. This is default Java support text. And you need to be able to understand and navigate this stuff. What the hell is this stuff? What does org.jgraph.t.core mean? What are packages? How do I use constructors? What kind of objects do I have? What are all these things? What is V and E? How do I read? What's an interface? How do I read these things, these lists of methods? What are constructors? It's just something that you need to learn. And there's a lot of resources out there to be able to do that. And then you start trying to implement that. So in this case, with this graph finding, I follow the same heuristic that we've learned previously with the example model. So I open my own little example model, I open it at main, and I try to figure out, well, what happens on startup? Which agents are embedded in here? What's going on? Oh, there's a model embedded. Let me go into that model. What happens on startup? This is where some network seems to be created. What is this code actually doing? And the code itself, it reads long, but if you go into it, it's actually fairly straightforward. But I need to be able to remind myself and use the Java doc to read up on what the hell is a directed weighted pseudograph. The code itself then literally just instantiates agents. So it's further into the hierarchy. We just follow our own heuristic and we can figure out, well, what are these rectangular node agents doing? Fairly simple process chart. Is there anything happening on startup? So you just nudge yourself through this. But the way I built this model was sequentially as well. First, I just instantiated one of those directed weighted pseudograph thingies using the Java doc, using the constructor. And then I took it step by step from there. Then I translated a network into agents, write a move function to move from one node to another. But it's always step by step. And then comes the wizard level to actually document that. So with this specific example, just a couple of months ago, I had a client. We built their factory, well, kind of a big, lots of buildings and things moving in between with usual AnyLogic network and agent moving along the network. And then they came up with, well, we need statistics on road usage for those segments. And we need to be able to specify specific paths because we have that internally. So I could then say, well, I have created this functionally. Let me get it back into that model. And it took me an hour or two to just understand again how this example model works. And within less than a day, I was able to actually transfer that into the real model, the full functionality, which then blew up the kind of capabilities that we could do with the model. And the main thing is because I documented it. I had my videos, I explained what was going on. The model itself has some documentation code as well. Relatively readable code, I would say. So that was really, really helpful. Alrighty, now at the wizard level, it's now time to show that I might not be a wizard myself. It's time to see me falter. So as I said, my good friend Max Sellmeier, who's also an AnyLogic wizard, I just asked him, can you build a simple model for me that has an error? But don't tell me about it. I don't want to know what the error is. And I want you now to watch me try to figure out what's going on. So don't focus on the error. Focus on me and what I'm doing. I'm going to try to talk you through the process. All I know about this model, let me share my screen again. All I know about this model is that if I click play on it, it's going to pause at some point because something is going wrong. So I don't even look at the model. I'm just going to run it, as I said before. So I run this model. Let's see what's going on. So we have some things moving around here. Again, I don't know what's going on, but I have a source block. This source block probably creates these products, which are animated here. And they're kind of, they're moving into a visual queue now. Some of them are queuing. We have this service, which takes some resources. And after the service, this is what they're doing now. They're moving to the sink, I assume. Little tick boxes. So interesting, do sanity check. So let me fast forward. And as was promised by Max, I'm going to see an error message if I fast forward. It says error. There would have been a better choice. Some color with only 6 agents instead of 7 agents. So somehow there's a bad choice here. Now, the first thing I would do now is to see where the hell does this error come from. So let me just paste this into the search and see exactly where the error is coming from. F sanity check decision, which sits here. Okay, so we're one step further. Let me keep that in mind. Let me now go into the model a little bit more to see if I understand it correctly. There's no startup action on main. The source itself creates agents, 8 per minute. We've talked about the weight. And it creates actual A products, which are then, I assume, put into that population, product agents. And these products, what do? They don't do anything. No startup code, there's just animation and literally nothing else. Okay. Any other things here? Do we have state charts? No. Do we have events? No. Do we have any other agent types here? No, it's just main and a product. So even the resource pool is just generic agents. Now let's go back to that error message. What's it saying? I can now read this if statement. So it only triggers if this condition is triggered. And what do we have here? It's a sanity check. So if something from this map is, if the chosen color is in this map and it's larger than amount, and some other thing, if there's something matching, then we're going to create this error message. And it's saying there would have been a better choice. So what do they mean by better choice? So what is this function actually doing? So there's no description here, which is typical, but not ideal. You would typically not see that in models that I'm building. I'm pretty religious. So let's first figure out where this is called from. Let me just ignore this, compile the model, and see. Let me close the other models so we don't get those error messages. See where this is called from. And this is called on enter of the delay of that service block. Do a sanity check for priorities. So the whole function is just a big fat sanity check. Is there maybe a description in this block? No. Would also be a good idea to document the service block, what it is doing. And again, this is just an example model from Max. He's not modeling like that. He just wants to stump me, which is fine. So what do? When we enter, we add ourselves to a little list. And when we enter the delay, we move ourselves from that list of queue and put our oval, our visual representation to be visible. And then we do that sanity check. Now, the sanity check itself, ignore that again. It does check a couple of things. So I would need to go into the details of that. I see some very scary for loop here without squiggly brackets, which I would fix right away. Check if there's any value. So he did document this quite well in quite some detail. And there is, if any value is smaller than the amount of products that we have chosen. So there is some mapping between color value and products, and the coloring seems to be quite important. So there's something going on with that. Let's explore this block a little bit more. Do we have any other Java code in here? Let's expand all the properties to see everything. We don't miss out on anything. Is there any other special stuff he's doing? They seize one unit. They have a really regular triangular delay time. He does use some task priority. So there is another function, get product priority, which returns something rather weird. So I would start or continue looking into this code and actually start, maybe just create one agent, see what happens then. Don't have the source block create lots and lots of agents. Just one, see what happens, then two, see what happens, and go really deep into that functionality of those colors and stuff. And just nudge myself closer and closer to getting to the problem.